There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart. Not with noise, but with a silence so heavy it changes how you breathe. The world keeps moving, but inside you, time slows. You wonder why healing takes so long. You ask yourself if something is wrong with you for not being over it yet. This story is about that waiting, about the seasons we try to skip, about the invisible work happening when nothing seems to change. In a small, unremarkable town, there lived a man named Elias Rowan. To the outside world, his life looked ordinary, but inside, he was carrying something unfinished, something time itself was asking him not to rush. This is not a story about speed. It's a story about patience and what grows when you finally allow time to do its work. Elias Rowan woke each morning before the sun, not because he needed to, but because stillness felt safer than sleep. Dawn had a way of asking fewer questions. The sky outside his window was often gray, undecided, hovering between night and day. Much like him. He lived alone in a modest house at the edge of town, where the streets grew quieter and the neighbors waved without stopping. His life was orderly, shoes aligned near the door, dishes washed immediately after meals, every hour accounted for. Discipline, he believed, was the language of strength. If you kept moving, if you stayed consistent, nothing could catch you off guard. But something already had. There was an ache in him that did not announce itself loudly. It didn't demand attention. It waited. It showed up in pauses, when the kettle boiled too long, when a song played in a grocery store, when silence lingered after a conversation ended. It was the feeling of something unresolved, like a sentence that never found its ending. Elias told himself it was normal. Everyone carried something. The difference, he believed, was how quickly you dealt with it. He admired people who bounced back, who wore their resilience like armor. He wanted to be one of them, so he worked harder. He filled his calendar. He stayed useful. Healing, in his mind, was a task. You applied effort, and results followed. Yet at night, when the house settled and the world grew dim, the ache returned with clarity. Not sharp, not unbearable, just persistent, like a quiet question tapping from inside his chest. He often stood by the window then, watching the empty street. Lights flickered on and off in distant homes. Somewhere people were laughing, arguing, living. Elias felt close to life, but not inside it. As if he were observing from a step behind, always almost there. He didn't speak about this to anyone. There was nothing obvious to explain, no dramatic loss he could point to, no single moment to blame. That made it harder. Invisible pain has a way of making you doubt its legitimacy. So he minimized it, compared it, dismissed it. "You're fine," he would whisper to his reflection. "You're just tired." But tiredness doesn't follow you into moments of success. It doesn't sit beside you when you achieve something you once wanted. Elias had noticed that even on his best days, the ache remained. Muted, but present, as if reminding him that something deeper was waiting to be felt. He believed healing was about pushing through, about proving you were stronger than time. He didn't yet understand that some things don't heal by force. They heal by patience. And patience was the one thing Elias had never learned to give himself. Elias Rowan believed in momentum. When something inside him felt uncertain, he answered it with motion. Action had always been his solution. So he built his days like ladders, each task a rung, each achievement proof that he was moving somewhere, even if he couldn't name the destination. He took on more responsibility at work, stayed later than required, became the one people relied on when deadlines tightened or pressure rose. There was comfort in being needed. Purpose, even if borrowed, felt better than emptiness. When others praised his discipline, he accepted it quietly, as if their words confirmed a truth he desperately wanted to believe. Mornings turned into structured rituals. He ran the same route every day, counting breaths, measuring progress by distance and sweat. His body responded first, stronger legs, steadier lungs. For a while, that felt like healing. Improvement was visible, tangible. You could measure it. Evenings were filled with books, planning, self-improvement podcasts playing softly in the background. Elias told himself he was investing in his future, building a version of himself that would eventually outgrow the ache. If he became disciplined enough, focused enough, the pain would have no place to stay. And in small ways, life seemed to reward him. His bank account grew, his reputation improved, invitations came more often. People began to describe him as grounded, reliable, strong. He wore those words like a uniform. They gave him shape. But there were moments, small, unguarded moments, when the truth slipped through. Like the afternoon he achieved something he had worked toward for years. He stood alone in his office after everyone had left, the city humming outside the windows. He expected relief, pride, a sense of arrival. Instead, there was only silence, not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. Elias stared at his reflection in the darkened glass. The man looking back at him appeared successful, composed, unshaken. Yet behind his eyes something flickered, an unspoken question asking, "Is this it?" He brushed it off. Doubt, he told himself, was just resistance before growth. You didn't listen to it. You outworked it. So he climbed higher. He set new goals the moment he reached old ones, refused to linger. Rest felt dangerous. Stillness felt like invitation for thoughts he didn't want to face. Forward motion kept him safe, but the ache didn't disappear. It adapted. It learned to live in the margins of his busy life. It waited patiently while he stayed distracted. It reminded him of itself when his guard was down, during quiet drives, half-finished meals, moments when laughter around him felt distant. Success, Elias realized, had not erased the pain. It had only given him better lighting to ignore it. Deep down, though he wouldn't admit it yet, a truth was forming, one that made him uneasy. He wasn't climbing toward healing. He was climbing away from it. The breaking point rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment. More often, it comes disguised as an ordinary day, one that begins like all the others, unaware it will be the last of its kind. For Elias Rowan, it was a phone call that came too early in the morning, the kind that pulls you out of sleep with a weight you feel before you understand it. He sat up in bed, heart racing, listening to words that felt unreal as they entered his ears. A voice explained, paused, apologized. By the time the call ended, Elias was already staring at the wall, his mind refusing to assemble what he had just heard. Someone he loved, someone woven quietly but deeply into his life, was gone. There was no warning, no chance for final words, no time to prepare. One moment the world was balanced, the next it tilted beyond recognition. Elias moved through the day on instinct. He dressed, he drove, he spoke when spoken to. Everything felt distant, as if he were watching himself from far away. People offered condolences, their voices blurred together, kind but unreachable. He nodded, thanked them, promised he was okay. Inside, something was splintering. The discipline that had always held him together failed without ceremony. His routines collapsed. Time lost its shape. Minutes stretched, then vanished. The ache he had once kept contained surged forward, no longer willing to wait quietly. At night, memories came uninvited. Ordinary moments, shared silences, unfinished conversations, small habits he had taken for granted. They arrived in waves, each one heavier than the last. Elias pressed his palms against his eyes as if he could physically hold himself together. He told himself he needed to be strong, that grief was something to manage, something to control. He tried to organize it the way he organized everything else. But grief does not respond to structure. It does not care about your plans. For the first time in years, Elias missed work, missed calls, let messages go unanswered. The man who had always been reliable disappeared into his own quiet chaos. And when he finally returned, pretending again, it was worse. People expected resilience, admired his composure. They told him how well he was handling everything. Each compliment felt like a misunderstanding, a reminder that no one could see the damage beneath the surface. One evening, alone in his house, Elias stood in the center of the living room and felt something inside him give way. Not dramatically, not with tears at first, just a deep, hollow realization. Everything he had built his sense of strength upon, discipline, achievement, control, had failed him when he needed it most. The ladder he had been climbing no longer touched the ground. He sank onto the floor, back against the wall, and let the silence surround him. This time, he didn't push it away. For the first time, Elias felt the full weight of what he had lost, and the terrifying truth beneath it. He had no idea how to carry it forward. Grief has a way of bending time. Days blur together, yet certain moments repeat endlessly, as if the mind is trying to rewrite an ending it refuses to accept. For Elias Rowan, denial did not arrive loudly. It arrived disguised as loyalty. He kept everything the same. Nothing in the house moved. The chair remained untouched. Messages stayed saved. Small objects, ordinary things, suddenly carried impossible weight. Letting go of them felt like betrayal, as if release meant erasing what had mattered. So Elias held on. He replayed conversations in his head, searching for signs he might have missed, reimagined moments, wondering what a different choice might have changed. His mind circled the past obsessively, not because it offered comfort, but because it offered familiarity. Pain, at least, was something he recognized. He told himself this was honoring love, that remembering was the same as preserving. But beneath that reasoning was fear, because if he accepted what had happened, he would have to accept what could never happen again. The future terrified him more than the loss itself. Friends checked in, gently at first, then less often. Elias responded politely, vaguely. He said he was managing. He said time would help. What he didn't say was that time felt like an enemy, each passing day carrying him further from what he was desperately trying to keep alive. At night, he lay awake, eyes open, listening to the quiet. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams returned him to the past, and waking up felt like losing them all over again. Mornings became something to endure, not begin. He avoided places that reminded him too strongly. Then, slowly, he avoided places that reminded him at all. His world shrank. Not suddenly, but carefully. as if he were folding himself inward to avoid breaking. Elias told himself he would feel better once he figured it out, once he understood the loss, once he made peace with it in his own way. He believed healing required solving an answer, a reason, a final thought that would make it all make sense. But grief is not a puzzle, and the more he tried to control it, the heavier it became. There were moments when he felt guilty for still hurting, as if enough time had passed to justify moving on. He scolded himself for his weakness, for not being able to handle it like he handled everything else. So he tightened his grip on memories, on routines that no longer served him, on a version of himself that existed before the loss. Elias did not realize it then, but holding on was not keeping him close to what he loved. It was keeping him frozen in the moment everything broke. And slowly, quietly, the weight of what he refused to release began to pull him under. There comes a point when holding on becomes heavier than letting go. Elias Rowan reached that point not with a decision, but with exhaustion. He stopped fighting. The days no longer demanded explanations. He let messages remain unread. Meals became simpler, quieter, sometimes forgotten altogether. The house, once kept in perfect order, grew slightly untidy, not from neglect, but from indifference. Effort felt unnecessary when nothing seemed to change. Elias spent more time alone than he had ever planned to. Silence became his constant companion. At first it felt unbearable, pressing in on him from every side, but slowly it softened. Or perhaps he simply grew numb to it. He took long walks without destination, sat on park benches and watched strangers pass by, children laughing, couples arguing softly, old men feeding birds. Life continued around him with an almost cruel normalcy. He felt invisible, and in some strange way that brought relief. There was no performance required at the bottom, no expectation to be strong, no applause to maintain. At night, Elias lay on the floor of his living room, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts drifted through him without resistance. Memories came, but they no longer demanded to be chased or corrected. They simply existed, like clouds passing overhead. For the first time since the loss, he cried, not in waves, not with drama, just a steady, quiet release. Tears fell without explanation. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't judge them. He let them be what they were. It felt less like breaking and more like emptying. In that stillness, Elias noticed something unexpected. Beneath the pain, beneath the fatigue, there was a faint sense of space, as if the constant tension he had been carrying had loosened its grip just slightly. He didn't feel better, but he felt honest. There were moments when fear returned, when he wondered if this emptiness was permanent, if he had sunk too far to climb back. He had no vision of the future, no goals, no urgency, just the present moment, stripped down to its simplest form. And strangely, that was enough. Stillness, Elias began to understand, was not the same as giving up. It was the absence of pretending, the end of resistance. At the very bottom, where there was nothing left to protect or prove, something new became possible. He didn't know it yet. He couldn't name it. But for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Elias was no longer running from his pain. He was sitting with it. And in that quiet surrender, the ground beneath him stopped falling away. Healing rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty or instruction. Often it enters quietly, through something small enough to be dismissed if you're not paying attention. For Elias Rowan, it was a bench in the park he had walked past dozens of times without noticing. That afternoon, the air was cool and unmoving. Leaves rested where they had fallen, undecided about the coming season. Elias sat down, not out of intention, but because his legs felt tired and the bench happened to be there. A few minutes passed before he noticed he wasn't alone. An elderly man sat at the opposite end of the bench, hands folded neatly in his lap, gaze resting on the pond ahead. They didn't acknowledge each other at first. There was no urgency to speak. The silence between them felt natural, unforced. Eventually, the man sighed, not from frustration, but from something like reflection. "People think time heals things," he said, still looking forward. "But time doesn't do the work. It only gives us the space to do it ourselves." Elias felt the words settle somewhere deep. He didn't respond. He wasn't sure how. The man continued, unbothered by the lack of conversation. "Most people spend that time fighting what hurts, holding on, rushing through it." A small smile touched his face, as if pain has a deadline. Elias turned slightly, surprised by how accurately the words described him. "What if you don't know what to do with it?" he asked quietly. The man finally looked at him. His eyes were calm, unhurried. "Then you don't do anything," he said. "You let it be heavy. You stop asking it to leave." They sat together in silence again. Ducks rippled the water. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Elias felt something shift, not relief, not understanding, but permission. Permission to stop trying to manage his grief. Permission to exist without answers. "I lost someone," Elias said, the words coming out before he could stop them. The man nodded, as if he had expected that. "Then you're not broken," he replied. "You're grieving." They stayed there a little longer. When Elias finally stood to leave, the man was already rising, movements slow but steady. "Be patient with yourself," he said gently. "Some things can't be rushed without being damaged." Elias watched him walk away, disappearing into the path that curved behind the trees. He never saw him again, but the words remained. For the first time, Elias considered that healing might not be something to achieve, but something to allow. And that thought, small as it was, followed him home like a quiet light. Elias Rowan did not wake up healed the next morning. There was no sudden clarity, no feeling of relief rushing in to replace the ache, but something had shifted, subtle, almost unnoticeable. The urgency was gone. For the first time, he wasn't trying to outrun his pain. He began with small choices, not improvements, not goals, just allowances. He let himself move more slowly through the day, let mornings unfold without forcing productivity into them. Some days he returned to the park. Other days he stayed home and listened to the quiet without filling it. At first, waiting felt uncomfortable, like standing still in the middle of a road while the world rushed past. His instinct told him he was wasting time, falling behind. That discipline demanded action. But Elias remembered the man's words. Some things can't be rushed without being damaged. So he practiced patience the way he had once practiced control. He noticed his grief came in waves, not straight lines. Some mornings felt lighter, others felt just as heavy as before. Instead of judging those moments, he acknowledged them. He stopped asking whether he was doing healing right. When memories surfaced, he didn't push them away. He let them pass through him. Some hurt deeply. Others surprised him with warmth. He learned that remembering didn't always reopen wounds, sometimes it softened them. Elias also began to release small things: a message saved too long, an object kept only out of fear. He didn't force these acts. He waited until they felt possible. Letting go, he realized, wasn't an event. It was a series of quiet permissions. There were days he failed, days he slipped back into old habits of distraction, of staying busy to avoid feeling. When that happened, he didn't punish himself. He simply noticed and returned to stillness when he could. This was new. This kindness toward himself. Healing, Elias was learning, wasn't about becoming who he was before. It was about becoming someone who could carry what had happened without collapsing under it. He started to feel space where tension once lived. Not emptiness, space. Room to breathe. Room to exist without constant effort. One evening, as the sun faded behind the rooftops, Elias stood by the window again. The street looked the same. People passed. Lights turned on. But this time he felt present. He wasn't waiting for the pain to disappear. He wasn't measuring progress. He was simply allowing time to move at its own pace and moving with it. Patience did not make the grief vanish, but it made it bearable. And for the first time since the loss, Elias sensed that healing was no longer something happening to him. It was something he was gently participating in. Healing is not a straight road. Just when it begins to feel familiar, it bends, and sometimes leads you back to places you thought you had already left. For Elias Rowan, the old storms returned quietly. It started with restlessness, a subtle urge to fill his time again, to move faster, to reclaim the discipline that once defined him. At first it felt harmless, productive even. He began waking earlier, structuring his days more tightly, pushing himself to stay on track. The ache noticed immediately. Old thoughts followed. You're falling behind. You should be stronger by now. Waiting is just another excuse. Elias felt the tension return to his chest, familiar and unsettling. For a moment, fear took hold, the fear that all his progress had been an illusion, that patience had only delayed the inevitable collapse. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, Elias nearly gave in. He sat at his desk, staring at a list of tasks he didn't truly care about, ready to drown himself in motion again. And then he stopped. Not because the urge disappeared, but because he recognized it. This, he realized, was the real test. Healing wasn't proven in moments of calm. It was proven when old habits returned, offering comfort in the language of control. Elias understood now that discipline, when driven by fear, was just another way of running. So, he chose differently. He stepped outside, let the air meet his face. He reminded himself that strength did not require constant pressure, that progress did not vanish just because discomfort returned. Some days, the storms were stronger. On those days, Elias faltered. He caught himself rushing, tightening, expecting too much. When that happened, he practiced something radical for him. He paused. He rested without guilt. Each time he did, the storm lost a little of its power. Elias began to understand that healing was not about eliminating old impulses. It was about responding to them with awareness instead of obedience. The habits might return, but they no longer ruled him. Slowly, trust replaced urgency. He trusted that time was not against him, that moving slowly did not mean moving backward, that patience, when practiced consistently, became its own quiet strength. The storms still came, but they no longer defined the landscape. They passed. and Elias remained. The morning Elias Rowan realized something had changed, nothing extraordinary happened. No milestone marked the day. No sudden joy announced itself. The world outside his window looked as it always had. Soft light, familiar streets, people moving through their routines. Yet inside him there was a quiet steadiness that had not been there before. He noticed it in the way he breathed. There was no rush in his chest, no silent demand to be somewhere else, someone else. The ache still existed, but it had softened around the edges, like a stone worn smooth by water. It no longer defined the shape of his days. Elias moved through his morning calmly. He made coffee and actually tasted it. He paused at the window and felt no urge to turn away from the view. Life no longer felt like something happening just beyond his reach. Purpose returned, not as ambition, but as alignment. He began to re-engage with the world on his own terms. Work became meaningful again, not because it distracted him, but because he chose it. Conversations deepened. He listened more, spoke less. There was space now for others because he was no longer crowded by his own resistance. One afternoon, he returned to the park, sat on the same bench. This time, he didn't look for anyone else to arrive. He watched the water move. Leaves drifted. Time passed without urgency. Elias realized he was no longer measuring his healing. He wasn't asking when it would end. He had learned how to live alongside it. What once felt like emptiness had become peace. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of fear around it. He trusted himself now, trusted his ability to feel deeply and continue anyway. As evening fell, Elias walked home slowly, aware of each step. The town felt familiar again, not distant. He felt connected, not to a past he had lost, but to a present he was finally inhabiting. Healing, he understood, did not give him back what he had lost. It gave him back himself. And that was enough. If you are listening to this story, it's likely because some part of you recognizes Elias Rowan. Not his life exactly, but his waiting, his quiet ache, his questions about time and healing. So let this final moment speak directly to you. Healing is not something you complete. It is something you allow. It moves at the speed of honesty, not effort. And when you rush it, you don't make it faster. You make it louder. Strength is not found in how quickly you recover. It's found in your willingness to stay present with what hurts without abandoning yourself. Patience is not weakness. It is the courage to remain open when closing off would be easier. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means loosening your grip so life can move again. What you release makes space, not emptiness, but room for peace to return in new forms. There will be days when old storms revisit you. That does not mean you've failed. Growth is not proven by perfection, but by awareness. Each time you choose gentleness over force, you deepen your healing. Purpose does not arrive when pain disappears. It arrives when you stop fighting your humanity, when you accept that loss can live alongside meaning and grief can coexist with hope. You are not behind, you are not broken, and you are not weak for needing time. Rebirth does not look like becoming someone else. It looks like returning to yourself, slowly, honestly, and without apology. So if you are waiting for permission to heal at your own pace, let this be it. Stay with yourself, trust the process, and remember, nothing real grows under pressure alone. It grows when given time, care, and patience. If this story brought you comfort or clarity, consider sharing it with someone who might need it too. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this, stories that meet you where you are, remember to like, subscribe, and stay. Your journey is unfolding, and it's allowed to take time.